My German fellow countrymen and calm defenders, I believe it is quite rare when a man is able to meet his old supporters again after nearly 20 years. When, over these past 20 years, he didn't need to revise or change his program at all. Today's gathering primarily reminds us of that time, that evening when we could still celebrate in the old hall 10 years ago. It reminds us of this because we were also in the midst of a very difficult struggle at the time. The fight for the seizure of power in Germany was just as fateful as the battle we are fighting today. We have only come to fully realize that in the past year, because if the victory had not been achieved in 1933, Germany would have remained what it was, meaning a powerless state with an army of 100,000 men that was inevitably doomed to wither away. And at the same time, a giant was already looming in the east with just a single thought in mind, with a keen eye on overrunning this weak, rotten, defeatist, and internally torn Europe. And if that struggle had not been won back then, the power not entered the world stage, the only one capable of confronting this danger now. Today we know that it is likely there would no longer be a Europe. So the struggle we waged back then was only apparently a fight for power within. In reality, it was already a fight for the preservation of Germany and, in the broadest sense of the term, the preservation of Europe. I am so calm towards every German who is fighting in the East today. And now returning home, I ask everyone this question. Look at our facilities, compare our homesteads, compare the colonies we're building, compare our social institutions with what you have seen over there. Compare the fate and the lot of the German farmer with that of the Russian farmer. Consider the fate of this Russian peasant. Compare that, my dear friend, and then tell me your verdict. Who has done it better? And above all, who was more sincere in their intentions?
No one has returned yet who could express any opinion other than that if a socialist state was being realized anywhere, it was only happening in Germany happened.
It happened. This is also one reason why this other world, especially when it represents capitalist interests, is against us. It's a corporation that still dares today to rule, direct, and if necessary, even maltreat the world according to its private capitalist interests. For example, just a few days ago, a real snobbish, perfumed brat like this Mr. Eden claims, "We British." In exploitation, in plundering. What does governing experience mean when in a country which with 46 million people corrects 40 million square kilometers of the entire earth, there were 2.5 million unemployed at the start of the war? Where is the art of governance here? Or even the art of leadership? It's simply the unscrupulousness of exploitation. And when that very man claims we have a venal instinct for spiritual and material values, indeed, they have destroyed spiritual values everywhere and stolen, appropriated material values. No, my friends, they cannot govern. You can only subjugate peoples and then let them languish in misery. And if this head ruffian, Roosevelt, I can't describe him any other way, steps in claiming that only American methods can save Europe, then all I can say is that Mister should have taken care of his own country first. He wouldn't have needed to go to war then. It would have made sense for him to get rid of his 13 million unemployed. He pushed the world into war because he couldn't cope with his internal issues, and because he, like his British allies, went after plunder, recognizing not just the idealistic, but especially the material values. Aside from treasures and the like, Roosevelt knew far too little about idealistic values compared to the English. The art of governance of our adversaries and their dreadful consequences, our democratic Germany gradually saw the rise of the National Socialist movement. If you had truly made Germany happy back then, we would have had no reason, and I would have had no cause to be involved. Day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, I dedicated myself to this work. You know this, all my old comrades in arms? Back then, I was not just lying around idle. I didn't just speak here and there in some fancy club or settle down in front of a fireplace to have a casual chat. I traveled tirelessly back and forth across the German lands, from top to bottom and from east to west, working my fingers to the bone just to rescue my people from the misery that the rulers of international capital had plunged them into. That conspiracy back then of Jews, capitalists, and Bolsheviks, that conspiracy, we wanted to eliminate it. And we finally eliminated it. And as soon as we did, the rest of the world immediately began their encirclement tactics again. Back then it was the Imperial Germany. Now it is the National Socialist Germany. Back then it was the Kaiser. Now it's me. The only difference is the Germany of that era was theoretically imperial, but in practice completely disintegrated. The emperor back then was a man who lacked any strength to resist these enemies. They now have an opponent in me who is not at all timid about the word surrender. It has always been my habit, ever since I was a boy, to perhaps be a bit stubborn. But overall, it might actually be a virtue, the habit I have of always having the last word. Rest assured, all these adversaries can be certain that the old Germany may have surrendered at 11:45, but I have always held out until 5 minutes past 12. I am keenly aware that the struggle is a very hard one, which is perhaps also what sets me apart from, say, a man like Churchill. Churchill said, we are now, the Reich Marshal and I have been accused of delivering whiny speeches recently. I don't get it. When I'm landing blows left and right and someone calls that absolute defeatism, that's no basis for conversation. I haven't felt like whining at all since 1939. I was, however, very saddened beforehand because I did everything to avoid the war. These days, Sven Hedin has published a book in which he, thankfully my offer to the English regarding Poland was quoted verbatim. I have to say I actually felt a shiver as I now revisited that offer. I can only thank the chairman for guiding things differently, and I'm grateful for what I've since learned, because if that offer had been accepted back then, Danzig would probably be German, but everything else would have remained the same. We would have committed ourselves to our social responsibilities. We would have devoted ourselves, we would have worked, we would have beautified our cities, we would have built residential colonies, we would have put our roads in order, we would have established schools, we would have built a proper National Socialist state, and of course, we would likely have spent much more on the armed forces. And one day this tempest from the east would have burst forth, sweeping across Poland and catching the Wehrmacht by surprise. Before we knew it, they would have been merely a few, scarcely 150 kilometers east of Berlin. I owe that to the gentleman who rejected it back then. Of course, 3 years ago, I couldn't have anticipated this. 3 years ago, I was sad about it. And when the mess with Poland was over, I wanted to extend a hand once again. I was then forced to wage yet another campaign. And I tried once again in 1940 to extend the hand of peace, my deepest thanks. That settled the matter for me. Every peace offer was interpreted by these quarters as a sign of weakness, and thus improperly so. Misusing the basic principles of the German Reich like that would have meant neglecting our duty to ever attempt such a thing again. I was certain about one thing: one country or one world had to fall now, either ours or the other. We will not fall, it is the other that will. You know, the fate that awaits us, lords, if the other world becomes victorious. Since we know and understand this fate so well, there isn't even the slightest thought of succumbing to any such destiny here. When the gentlemen occasionally claim that there's another peace offer from us, they're just doing that to make themselves look good to their own people. We're making absolutely no peace offers. The last offer was made in 1940. Now there's only one thing left, and that is to fight. Likewise, from a certain moment, I'll say the same to our domestic foes. You can't reason with you peacefully. You want force, so force you shall now receive. And these domestic enemies, they have been eliminated. Another power, which was very formidable in Germany, has meanwhile learned that the National Socialist prophecies are not mere phrases. It is the main culprit. To whom we owe all this misfortune, international jury. If the Jews think they can incite an international world war to exterminate the European races, the result will not be the extermination of the European races, but the extermination of the Jews in Europe. They always scoffed at me as a prophet. Of those who laughed back then, countless are no longer laughing today. Those who are still laughing now may not be laughing in the near future. This perception will spread beyond Europe, across the entire world. International Jewry will be recognized for its demonic danger. We National Socialists will see to that. In Europe, this danger has been recognized, and nation by nation is aligning with our legislative processes. We see in this enormous struggle today only one possibility anyway. And now the only question that remains is whether there's any reason to doubt our success. When you follow our opponents' propaganda, I must say they are either elated to the skies or utterly dejected. A minor victory anywhere, and you're doing cartwheels with joy, acting as if you've already annihilated us. Then the tide turns, and you're plunged into sorrow again, and they are downcast again. I would just like to point to an example. If you followed the Russian army reports since June 22nd, read it and you'll see daily reports like this. Engagements of insignificant or even significant nature. We've shot down 3 times the number of German planes. The number of sunken ships in the Baltic Sea already exceeds the entire pre-war fleet of Germany. You claim to have destroyed so much of ours that we couldn't possibly have enough divisions. But the reality is you're always fighting in the same place. Occasionally, you might humbly announce, after 14 days, we have evacuated a city. But generally, you have been fighting in the same place since June 22nd, always successfully. We're always being pushed back. And with these continuous pushbacks, you've slowly advanced to the Caucasus. I say slowly, that's for my adversaries to note, not for our soldiers, because the pace at which our soldiers have covered ground here is unparalleled. Again, what has been achieved this year is tremendous and historically unparalleled. I don't always do things how others would like. Well, I consider what the others probably believe and then do the exact opposite. So if Mr. Stalin expected us to attack in the middle, I didn't want to attack in the middle. Not just because Mr. Stalin might have believed that, but because I had no interest in it. Rather, I wanted to reach the Volga at a specific place, at a particular city, conveniently bearing the name of Stalin himself. I set off there not because of the name, it could have been called something entirely different, but because it's a critical point. That's where 30 million tons of traffic are cut off, including nearly 9 million tons of oil traffic. It's where all the wheat from the vast regions of Ukraine and the Kuban area flows together to be transported up north. That's where the manganese ore was transported. That was an enormous hub. I wanted to capture it. And you know, we're modest. We've taken it. There are just a few small places left there. Now others ask, why not fight there? Because I do not want to create another Verdun. Instead, I prefer to do it gradually with small pushes. Time doesn't matter anymore. No ships are coming up the Volga. That's the crucial point. We've also been criticized for why it took us so long at Sebastopol. We didn't want to start a massive slaughter there. Blood is already flowing more than money. But Sevastopol has indeed fallen into our hands, and the Kerch Peninsula is in our hands too. And we will persistently achieve one objective after another. And if the enemy now makes moves to attack, don't think for a moment that I intend to preempt them. Rather, at the same moment, we'll let them attack. Because defense is always cheaper in the end. Let him go ahead and attack. He'll bleed himself out doing so. We've always managed to correct that so far. At any rate, the Russians are not at the Pyrenees or in front of Sevilla after all. That's the same distance from where we are today, say in Stalingrad or say Antwerp, but we are standing there. That much is undeniable. It's a fact. If things really can't go any other way, then they say it was a mistake. Then there's a sudden switch and they claim it was a total mistake for the Germans to go to Kirkenes, or that they went to Narvi, or now to Stalingrad. What were they looking for in Stalingrad? Stalingrad, a monumental mistake, a strategic blunder. Let's just wait and see whether that was a strategic mistake. We're already noticing many signs that might tell us if it was such a huge error to occupy Ukraine. That we occupy the Gyorok ore region, that we've gotten hold of the manganese ores. Was it really such a big mistake to take control of the Kuban region, perhaps the world's biggest grain supplier? Was it a mistake that I can safely say that we have destroyed or taken possession of 4/5 or 5/6 of all their refineries? That, for a start, we have in our hands. We have completely shut down a production of 9 or 10 million tons of oil and have cut off further transport of maybe 7, 8, or 9 million tons per year. When we cut off the traffic over the Volga and what else we plan to do, we'll see if it was really all that mistaken. I honestly don't know what would have happened if the English had managed to seize the Ruhr region, the Rhine, and then the Danube, the Elbe, Upper Silesia, which is roughly the Donetsk basin. And that's the Bullrocker ore region and the Kerch ore region. And if you then take parts of our Victonium, if they had seized our resources and if they had taken over the Magdeburg factories too, would they also say they made a major mistake by taking those things from the Germans? That it was an operational error? If you try to convince your own truly small-minded and limited peoples of such a thing, well, that would be something. You seem to think that some believe it, others don't, based on press statements that sometimes get very angry and say, we should finally be left alone with this nonsense. If you're saying this to convince us, then let me tell you, you're really confusing the Germany of today with the Germany we have. That, I don't know, might have lived centuries ago, because you can't make today's Germany believe that. And if you will perhaps want to make me believe something, all I can say is, I've never based my strategic plans on others' recipes or perspectives. It was also no doubt a mistake that we broke through in France back then. But it was worth it. After all, the English were marched right out of France, and they had been there for quite some time, certainly. I believe they had previously stated that they had about 1 million men there. And let's not forget one thing, my party comrades, men and women alike. Back then, they were already so close to our borders. They had 13 divisions there. In addition to that, over 130 French divisions and more. Approximately 24 Belgian divisions and another 20 Dutch divisions. Right at our border, at the Rhine, our Rhine. And where are they now?
And if you say today that you've advanced somewhere in the desert, you've advanced a few times and then you've retreated. What really matters in this fight, the final blow, and rest assured, we will be the ones to deliver it. And as for your production, you produce everything naturally, and especially everything much better than us. When the Americans come out with something new, I read just a few days ago, they've designed a new submarine. As I read that, I immediately thought, this is surely going to be the best again. Sure enough, it said right there, the best submarine in the world. The most ingeniously designed, it's the fastest, and in diving, it's the best in everything. We are mere amateurs. My fellow Germans, we are not sleeping, neither are our engineers. And when those gentlemen over there claim they have a marvelous new weapon, they have no idea if we haven't already got a better one. I've gotten into the habit of only unveiling a new weapon when the old one really isn't up to scratch anymore. Why disclose new weapons prematurely? This strategy has proven itself time and time again. We've always had the inferior weapons, obviously. We had the poorer soldiers, that's clear. We had by far the worst organization. Who would be surprised, considering we're comparing ourselves to these organizational geniuses? Compared with Churchill, Cooper, Chamberlain, or even Roosevelt, that organizer par excellence. When you compare, we were, of course, organizationally complete bunglers. But we have achieved one success after another, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Inside my party comrades, it was the same. We were always the inferiors. We couldn't do anything. We didn't have any capabilities. But one day we seized power. It's understandable that in a struggle as global as the one we're facing now, we can't expect to achieve a new success week after week. It's simply not possible. But that's not what's critical here. What matters is gradually assuming positions that will ultimately destroy the enemy, and then holding on to those positions, fortifying them so they can't be taken again. You can count on that. What we've secured, we hold on to firmly. In this war, at least, no one else will reach where we stand. Rest assured, when today Roosevelt carries out his assault on North Africa with the remark that he must protect it from Germany and Italy and so on, there's no need to waste words on the deceptive rhetoric of that old swindler. He is undoubtedly the top gangster of the entire bunch we're up against. But rest assured, Mr. Roosevelt will not have the final say. We will prepare all our strikes thoroughly and meticulously, as we always do. They've always come at the right time, and none of the blows the enemy thought to strike against us have led to their success. There was once a triumphal uproar when the first English landed in Bologna, and then and 6 months later, that triumphal shouting had ceased. Things turned out differently, and it will turn out differently here too. You can have complete confidence that the leadership and the Wehrmacht are doing everything that needs to be done. And I am utterly convinced that behind the leadership and the armed forces, but above all the German homeland stands, and particularly behind me stands the entire National Socialist Party. Thus, a sworn community. What sets the present and the past apart is that in the past there was no people behind the Kaiser, while today one of the most magnificent organizations ever built on this earth stands behind me. But now at the helm of this nation stands someone who has only ever known the fight, who has known only one principle: to strike, strike, and strike back. And another thing sets today's Germany apart from that of the past. Back then, the leadership lacked roots in the people. After all, it was ultimately a class state. Today we are in the midst of completing what grew out of that past war, because when I returned from the war, I brought the frontline experience back home with me. From this frontline experience, I then built my National Socialist People's Family at home. Today, the National Socialist People's Community takes its place at the front. And you will notice from many things how this Wehrmacht becomes more National Socialist month by month, as it increasingly takes on the character of the new Germany, as all privileges, classes, prejudices, and so on are more and more abolished. How the German community is increasingly asserting itself month by month, and how by the end of this war, the German community may well have received its strongest test of endurance precisely through these wars. That's what distinguishes modern Germany from the Germany of old. And we owe that on one side to the immense heroism at the front, a heroism of millions of individual soldiers, both known and unknown. Known and unknown, a heroism of tens of thousands of brave officers. They now feel more and more like a community with their men. They have in part grown out of these men. We've removed all the barriers. Just as in the party, anyone can reach any position if they're capable. Just as the highest state office is now open to even the poorest child of our people. Ever since this party has taken over leadership, the same holds true for the armed forces, and not just in theory or politics, not just as a one-off exception, but in practice. Today we have holders of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, non-commissioned officers, and privates who've been awarded the Knight's Cross. It's been given to countless individual men, bestowed upon individual soldiers. Those who have distinguished themselves heroically. Countless officers have risen from the ranks. We are forging a war in the midst of war like the world has never seen before. Back home, however, the people are also working tirelessly. This I must now declare in the Reichstag as a testament to our German homeland. In 1917 to 1918, there were strikes in the munition factories, but today it's a deluge. Hour after hour of work. Today, the German worker at home is determined to forge weapons for his comrades out there. What's being created in the country and in the cities by men, and especially by countless women, is tremendous. And it's quite clear that in one aspect, we could never compete with our adversaries, just like the party used to be the earnest one. Having achieved victory through the idealism of its supporters, the German people naturally embody that same spirit today. Among perhaps all the nations of the world, we are the poorest in gold. We have no gold. But what we do have is our living labor force. What we have is a sacred diligence and a sacred will. And that, in the end, is what matters in such a life and death struggle. 1,000 times more crucial than gold. I mean, what good are the Americans' gold reserves to them now, other than for gold teeth or something? But what's the use in that? If they had 10 synthetic rubber factories instead of gold, that would be worth more than all the gold they've stockpiled. I had other things built. We may not have brought gold into this war, but we brought the prerequisites for leading this fight. And we Germans certainly don't have tanks without rubber-tired wheels, but the English do now. We will endure this war in terms of materials, and even more so now because we have secured ownership of the raw material regions that are essential to sustain this war under any circumstances. And if someone says, well, why haven't we noticed more impact? It's quite simple. Don't think, gentlemen international critics, or however I should address you, that we've just stood there, hands in pockets, constantly looking at destroyed railway bridges, destroyed rail tracks, destroyed hydroelectric power stations, or destroyed ore mines. Please don't think we've just stood by with our hands in our pockets staring at the destroyed coal mines. We've been hard at work this year. And now you're beginning to pay the price for it. And when next year comes, the fruits of this work will really show. And I can proudly say that the party has proven itself here immensely. Countless brave party comrades stand out there, organizing vast areas with just a handful of people, as if born to be National Socialist district leaders or local group leaders. They are organizing huge territories and unlocking these areas for the future. For our economy, for our war economy, for our nourishment, and in a broader sense, truly for the nourishment and preservation of all of Europe. It's not just a war that Germany is fighting on its own, it's a war that is genuinely being fought for Europe. And it's only from this that we can understand why so many willing volunteers have come forward from the north to the south, some fighting in our ranks, some as independent armies or independent contingents enlisted in this most formidable front in the history of the world. It is therefore also our unwavering resolution that the peace which must eventually come, because it will indeed be a peace for Europe, free from the supervision of those with a keen instinct for both ideal and material values. As for what sort of instinct Mr. Iden has for ideal values, we don't know that. He has never proven or shown it anywhere. His conduct doesn't speak for it either. Above all, the culture of his own country is by no means such that it could impress us, coming from the man who I'm not going to talk about across the ocean at all. So the instinct for idealistic values is certainly less than our instinct for them. After all, we've probably given the world more in terms of idealistic values than the society overseen by Mr. Eden. The same goes for the countries that are allied with us. Some of them look back on cultures which, compared to the culture of this English donkey realm, is truly an infinitely young culture. Regarding material values, I believe they do indeed have a keen interest in that. But we have that too, just with a distinction. We want to ensure that under all circumstances, Europe's material wealth benefits the peoples of Europe in the future, and not some small overseas international financial clique. That's our goal. Unwavering and relentless determination. The peoples of Europe are not fighting so that afterwards a few people with a fine instinct might come again and they begin to bleed humanity dry and leave millions unemployed just to fill their vaults. We had a good reason to abandon the gold standard. We want to save the world by doing away with one of the prerequisites for this kind of economic approach and remove economic exploitation. Rest assured, Europe will emerge from this war much healthier economically than before, because a substantial part of this continent, which has been organized against Europe, will now be put to the service of the European nations. If someone now says to me, haha, so you want to relocate the Dutch, I don't want that. I don't intend to uproot anyone, but I believe there will be many people who are happy to have a piece of land of their own and to be able to work it. And if they do not have to toil and slave, like it is the case in some parts of this overcrowded continent, but above all, they will be happy when the rewards of their work benefit themselves, their people, and their hard-working men and women. And not for some vault, for all I care. That's in London, in the Bank of London, or in London itself. I believe, therefore, that the end of this war will also mark the fall of this gold dominance externally as well. And with that, the toppling of this whole society that is responsible for this war. The mission of the National Socialist Party is clear to us all. I need not repeat it today. National Socialism has always been a combative force internally for many, many years. And now it must be externally in our surroundings towards the wider world. And from every party member, I expect above all that he is with the utmost fanaticism, just as in the time of struggle, this belief in victory and success. Today, it's much easier than back then. Today, I must admire each one of my former party comrades. These many small men who believed in the unknown, nameless soldiers of the World War, these men who followed me back then, who risked their lives for me, so many who gave their lives, not just here back in the old Reich, but also in the Ostmark, in the Sudetenland, and even beyond that in other countries. I have to admire them. They followed me back then as a completely unknown man. Today, before all of us collectively, stands the mighty, great realm, and above all, we stand before a future to be or not to be of our entire people, every National Socialist who believed in me back then. One can only be a fanatic today in the struggle outwardly as well, and one must come to the same fanatical consistency that we already had back then. There are enemies for whom there is no quarter. There is only one possibility. Either we fall or this enemy falls. We are aware of it, and we are man enough to coldly confront this realization. And that's what sets me apart from those gentlemen over in London and in America. When I demand a lot from the German soldier, I'm not asking for anything more than what I myself have always been ready to give. When I ask a lot of the German people, I'm not asking for anything more than what I myself am working. When I call for long overtime hours, I don't even know what an overtime hour is in my life. I just don't know, because everyone might have the good fortune to be able to step away from their work for a certain time and then be free. My work is freedom. The fate of the Reich, I cannot distance myself from it. It haunts me day and night ever since I stepped forward to lead the nation. In these days of grey misery, of lamentation and distress, of collapse. Since that moment, the very idea of a vacation for me would border on absurdity. What does vacation mean when the only thing ever before my eyes is Germany, my people, their future, the future of their children? Therefore, I expect nothing more from anyone else than what I demand of myself or what I am prepared to do myself. I know that my old party comrades truly represent the core of this movement, and they lead the way exemplarily in our nation in memory of the first sacrifices we made. And joining them are the hundreds of thousands of millions of National Socialist officials, party members, and parties. All members of our affiliated organizations will march with us. All our men from the SA and the SS will march with us. The men of our Labour Front will march with us. The men from the Reich Labour Service, in short, everyone. The entire National Socialist German populace. What's truly remarkable today is that we don't stand alone as preachers in a desert like I once did, but rather every word that we proclaim to the people now echoes back 1,000-fold. And if the enemy thinks they can wear us down with anything, they're mistaken. They can't sway me from our goal. And when the hour comes, I will strike back, and then with interest upon interest upon interest. You remember the long time we had to remain legal as party comrades. How often did my old fighters come to me back then and say, leader, or they used to say to me also, boss, or they called me Adolf Hitler. Why can't we fight back? Why do we have to put up with this? For years, I had to constantly force them to act within the law. I have had to painfully exclude comrades from the movement because they felt they could not follow these orders year after year until the time finally came when I called upon them. And so it is today. Sometimes I must endure for months on end. Believe me, it doesn't mean my heart isn't consumed by anger. When I hear about these airstrikes, you know, I refrained from doing so for many months. I didn't allow a single bomb to be dropped on Paris before we attacked Warsaw. I called for surrender 5 times. All of those requests were rejected. I asked for at least the women and children to be evacuated. They didn't even receive my envoy. Again, everything was rejected. And only then did I resolve to do what is permitted by the laws of war. When the English began bombing, I waited 3.5 months without taking action. Back then, there were many who asked, why don't we retaliate? Why can't we fight back? We were already strong enough to do it. I waited, hoping that reason might still prevail. Things turned out differently. Believe me, today it's no different. I remember it all. You'll see over there that German inventiveness is not to be underestimated. And you will get a response that will astonish you. Losing your hearing and sight, and I've had to tell people before that just because I don't speak for a while doesn't mean I've lost my voice. It only means that I didn't consider it appropriate to speak. And that's still the case today. What should I be speaking for now? Ultimately, it's the front lines that are speaking today. Everything else is just empty talk. Only on the rarest occasions do I wish to speak out, because what the front utters is so compelling. It's such a unique language that it obligates every single German anyway. Anyone who reads the military report, our armed forces report, and then doesn't passionately commit to their people after hearing about the countless acts of heroism, that person wouldn't be helped by more talk. And as for foreign countries, I don't speak for them anyway. I've never spoken for foreign countries. I only speak for my German people. Whether foreign countries listen to me or not is completely indifferent to me. If Mr. Roosevelt says he doesn't listen to my speeches, I can only say that I don't speak for Mr. Roosevelt at all. He just once tried to chat me up. I don't converse with Mr. Roosevelt at all, save for that one time he reached out to me by telegram, to which I responded as a courteous man. I only speak now through the instrument that alone can speak, and this instrument speaks loudly and clearly enough. Otherwise, I speak only on the rarest occasions to the movement and to my own German people. And all that I can say through such a speech is always just one thing: think. Without exception, every man and woman must realize that this war will determine the very existence of our people. And once you understand this, every thought of yours and every action will become nothing but a prayer for our Germany.